And it is a great pleasure for me to introduce our second speaker this afternoon, Dr. Armando Lampe. He is a theologian, a sociologist, a politician from Aruba, holding a PhD from the FU. Armando Lampe has worked as a priest, a teacher, and a politician in Aruba, serving as the Minister of Education from 2017 to 2021. He has published several books and articles on the church history of Latin America and the Caribbean region, and one of them is, of course, Mission or Submission, Moravian and Catholic missionaries in the Dutch Caribbean during the 19th century. And this title, Mission or Submission, of course, hints at the problematic role missionaries have played in the interplay of colonial and missionary enterprises in history. So we eagerly anticipate your presentation, Armando. It's titled Church and Slavery in Curaçao, I think.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I would like to refer at first to the flyer where it was announced mission, the church and slavery in Suriname and the Dutch Caribbean. And technically spoken, it is not correct for the 19th century, in the sense that when we speak about the Dutch Caribbean, and my book is about the Dutch Caribbean in the 19th century, it includes Curaçao and Suriname. So the definitions, they vary, and we have to take that into account. For example, now in the 21st century, Dutch Caribbean refers only to 3 islands after 2010, that is Bonaire, Statia, and Saba. So here you see how the a different content of the Dutch Caribbean. The 19th century is completely different than the 21st century. So just to state that, because otherwise it will remain strange to talk about the 19th century and to say Suriname and the Dutch Caribbean, while in the 19th century Suriname was part of the Dutch Caribbean. And the title of my book also stresses the term missionaries. I do not talk about Moravian Church or Catholic Church. I used the term missionaries because it is also a question of definition. The church, what is the church? The institution, the people, and my focus was then on the missionaries. And at the end of my presentation, you will see why it is so important that to make this statement for me then. And when I was invited for this presentation, I was invited to talk about my book that was published nearly 25 years ago. And it is not a current research in action and not a recent research that has been published. It is a research was carried on, and that's why in my presentation I have chosen to put the book in the context, because otherwise we will be lost if we do not put it in the context. Nearly a quarter century ago, it was published by Van der Hoek and Ruprecht in Göttingen, and the research was carried on in the 80s and the 90s. So you can imagine that I am now an old man in the Caribbean Sea, because we are going way back in time. And so it is necessary to put the research in its context. And it was the Caribbean studies after the triumph of the Cuban Revolution in 1959. In the Caribbean studies, there were more interest for economy and politics, and not so much for religion. And if there were in the Caribbean studies interest for the religion at that time, it was more the anthropological interest of the African retentions in the religious expressions in the Caribbean. No? I myself was a student of Professor Tribbles in Nijmegen, and he was one of those exponents. I can refer to the work of Herskovits, no, with the central question if religious expressions in the Caribbean have African retentions. I can refer to the work of Roger Bastide, Les Amériques Noires, Simpson, religious cults of the Caribbean. They all had that interest, but not the interest in the social role of Christian missionaries and Christian churches with the question of slavery and abolition of slavery. That, and we can see it also in the interest, the famous work of Eric Williams, Capitalism and Slavery. His statement was that the abolition of slavery was only due to economic factors. And it was because of contradictions within capitalism that the slavery was abolished. There was no interest for ideological factors or for religious factors in the process of the abolition of slavery. That changed when in 1971, Steve Jacobson published an important work, Am I Not a Man and a Brother? British Missions and the Abolition of the Slave Trade and Slavery in West Africa and the West Indies. There he corrected the classic work of Eric Williams, saying that the abolition of slavery cannot be explained only by economic factors, but you have to take into account the Christian missionary work, because the Christian missionary work played a fundamental role in the abolition of slavery in the British colonies in 1834. And in 1982, the work of Turner, Mary Turner, followed the same line with more details in her research, Slaves and Missionaries, the Disintegration of Jamaican Slave Society. And here you will see that the Baptist Church, the Native Baptist Church, had a decisive contribution to the abolition of slavery, to the slave rebellion in 1831 in Jamaica. And that rebellion put pressure on the public opinion and the Christian abolitionists in London, in England. And you can say that in a certain sense, the interpretation of the slaves of the Christian message against the will of the missionaries, and together with the Christian abolitionists, they all played an important role according to this important work of Mary Turner, that we can say in a certain sense that mission, the Christian missionary work didn't have the social function only of accommodation, but also had the social function of resistance against the slavery system. In the same year was published the important work of Orlando Patterson, the great work, Slavery and Social Debt. And he had a different conclusion. He came to a different conclusion than the work of Mary Turner. He was the one representing, saying that the Christian churches were sustaining the slavery system and didn't have that function that Mary Turner said of also resistance against the slavery system. So in that context, I did my research, and I followed then the work published in 1980, a collection of essays called Anti-Slavery, Religion and Reform, where the scholars at that time, they were and the same line saying that the abolition of slavery, we have in order to explain it, to look in the interaction between economic factors, anti-slavery movement, religion, and reform. And the central thesis of my book, in a certain sense, I am looking into that interaction between those factors. And I came to this thesis at that time, that indeed there is a link between the emancipation process, the process of abolition of slavery, and Christianity in the Dutch Caribbean, so including Curacao and Suriname. But the link has to be expressed in a different way, on the contrary to what Turner, the conclusion of Mary Turner for the British Caribbean. In the Dutch Caribbean, we have to conclude that the missionary work was within that network of factors, interaction factors, was one of the factors responsible for the fact that the abolition of slavery took place 50 years later in 1863. So if we see the records in the 19th century, after 1834, we see that the Dutch authorities, they have chosen to give priority to, first we have to educate morally and religiously the slaves, and then they can be free. And it took then, they gave then all the facilities to the Catholic Church, a non-established church in Curacao, because a Protestant colony, the Catholic Church was a non-established church, already active under the slaves since the 17th century. And they gave all the support, the Dutch authorities in the 19th century, after the abolition of slavery in the British Caribbean, to the Catholic Church to educate the slaves before they can be freed. And the same happened in Suriname. They gave all the opportunity to the Moravian Church, already active under the slaves, to educate the slaves to be obedient, to accept the status quo, the established order, and then in order to reach the point of the abolition of slavery. And that is my central thesis, that the emancipation in the Dutch Caribbean came so late compared to the British Caribbean. One of the factors is that the Catholic and the Moravian missionary work was one of the factors explaining why the abolition of slavery came so late in the Dutch Caribbean. If you ask me now, after 25 years, because that was one of the questions that they asked me after 25 years of publication of this book, what will be now your interest, or do you have a different opinion? Maybe I will, in the flyer, originally it was said for the presentation, mission and submission, and later it was corrected that indeed was the title of my book was Mission or Submission. But maybe now, if I publish it, republish it, I will say mission is submission. In the sense that speaking for the Moravian mission and speaking for the Catholic mission in the 19th century in the Dutch Caribbean. For that specific period, that specific area, I will state now, knowing more knowing more about post-colonial studies. And in my time, when I did the research, I was not, the post-colonial studies came to flourishing afterwards. And where now in the post-colonial studies, you can see that the ideological factor that to sustain the colonial system, it was so important, the ideological factor and the religious factor in sustaining colonialism. And so that's why I will say now that I will change the title to Mission is Submission. And but I have to state also, it's very important for me when I said at the beginning that my focus was on the missionaries, because now my interest, and I hope that the younger scholars will follow my interest, I'm not so much interested anymore in the missionaries. I am much more interested in those who receive the message, in the other logic, in the slaves. Like already Eugene Genovese has stated, the enslaved, they conquered the religion of the conquerors. Because the interpretation, and in my book, I refer to that also, and I give some hints for further research, that the interpretation of the slaves of Christianity is very different than the Christianity of the missionaries. When my colleague Franklin referred to the Johannes King and his actions, his 3 actions to convert to Christianity, I can give a different interpretation of the same Johannes King. And you can read it in my book also. It is well known that in the African religiosity, after a certain period, it is important to go on in the spiritual battle within the African religiosity to destroy objects of witchcraft. And what Johannes King did was exactly using the gospel, using Christianity to affirm his African religiosity by destroying objects of witchcraft. And so he could move on. So my interest now is that I think in the conversion studies, I'm seeing that conversion, contrary to what the word is saying, that you convert from one worldview to another worldview, I see much more continuity and not disruption. And even I question the word conversion, if it is a right concept to understand the enslaved, the slaves, the oppressed ones, how they interpreted the Christian message. And that's why I would like to encourage the younger scholars among you. It is really a treasure what we have in Herrnhut. In Herrnhut is the archive of the Moravians. And as one philosopher has stated, the Germans, they are so well organized, both for the good as for the evil. Really, what I have found there in organization of an archive in Herrnhut is not comparable to what I have seen in Zeist or in Paramaribo. The Moravian spirituality had 2 dimensions that is important for further research. First is that you have to read the word of God for the Moravian missionary. So they teach the enslaved to read the word of God, read and write. That's why you will find many slave letters in the archives of Herrnhut. And the second dimension is of the Moravian spirituality was that for the Christian salvation history, it is important to record your testimonies. And that's why they enforce the missionaries, for example, to write diaries. And those dagboeken of the missionaries, you will find them classified, etc., in Herrnhut. But not only that, they asked the enslaved to record, and that's why you will find letters of slaves stating their testimony, their Christian testimony. And there you will see the other logic. The interpretation of the gospel by the enslaved ones that is really completely different than the Christianity of the missionaries. And it is a wealth of information for linguistic research there because the letters sometimes are written in Creole language, and they are archived there in Herrnhut. And for anthropologists, but also for missiologists, it is such a wealth of information that you have there to see the other point of view of those below in the history. And Herrnhut is a small village near Dresden. So before the downfall of the Berlin Wall, practically no researchers went there to do research because it was an isolated place. And still it is an isolated place. And waiting there, I think, waiting for many PhDers, PhD thesis and master thesis to be produced in the future. Finally, I have still copies of my book. They are, after 25 years, you cannot just easily get to them. I'm willing, if those who organize this seminar, those who are interested, free of charge, I will send it to an address in the Netherlands or where you want. So to share my book with you if you do not have a copy. Thank you so much for your patience and attention.
Thank you so much, Armando, for this very interesting presentation, looking back, looking at how you radicalized in certain aspects and how you gave us a lot of food for thought and ideas for further research. So I cannot imagine that there are no questions or reactions for Armando. So please raise your hand, let me know. I see Bruno van Engel. Please unmute yourself. We don't hear you, so you have to unmute yourself first.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Yes.
With my
Now you
camera.
are.
When growing up as a young Christian, I had this tension between what missionaries believe and what I thought that the Bible teaches. And that is something which I have struggled through my teenage years. And in fact, at a certain stage, I came to the conclusion that the missionaries have a different religion than what the Bible teaches me. And that is something which, up till today, I have this feeling that Christianity, which was brought to the missionaries, is something different than what the Bible teaches. And in fact, my belief in God is strengthened by the fact that despite the fact that the missionaries' religion is different, it gave me a sense that God is speaking directly to me, and that He is calling me and telling me that look at the Bible. The Bible gives you the road to which you should travel. This is just to confirm what you said, that the religion of the missionaries is different from what the slaves experience as such. So even though I've not been a slave, I had this feeling that, hey, what I learned from the missionaries is different from what I read and see in the Bible. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your observation. In a certain sense, now we know that there existed also a selected Bible by missionaries to justify slavery.
Mhm.
Only certain passages of the Bible were used to justify slavery, and other passages of the Bible, like the message in Ephesians that they are neither male nor woman, nor free nor slave, everyone is equal. Those passages were left out in the selected Bible that was preached by the missionaries. So indeed, there is a gap, but in a certain sense, like one of my professors, Professor Langdon Gilkey, he himself was a student of Paul Tillich, a famous Protestant theologian. He was a guest professor in Nijmegen when I was studying there, so many years ago. He said to us, humanity and in using the Bible does not learn from the past. We continue selecting passages of the Bible to justify certain position. No? I can refer now, for example, now in Aruba, I have seen the Christian churches and the Christian pastors, missionaries, with a crusade against the gay marriage, and they use all kinds of passages from the Bible to justify the oppression of the homosexuals. In the same way that in the 19th century, you see missionaries using passages from the Bible to justify the oppression of the slaves, because they are descendants of Canaan and etc.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
No, thank you so much. And perhaps as a New Testament scholar, I can even add to this that the discussion about how to deal with enslaved people in the community has even been a disputed topic at the very beginning. So you cited Galatians 3, no male, no female, no slave, no free. And on the other hand, the household codes, who were always in the Bible of the colonizers, of course, seem historically to be kind of a reaction to this baptismal statement, which was greeted with too much enthusiasm from the enslaved members of the community. We know that even at the beginning of Christianity, this kind of discussions took place, and that some community members tried to free those who were enslaved from the money of the church, and others were very much against it. So these same discussions and struggles start very early in Christianity. Thank you so much, both of you, for now giving this fresh insights, really. I see Maurice and Ramon then. Maurice first. And Mildred, oh yeah, you also want to say something? Okay, Mildred, you are the third one then. Maurice, please.
Yes, thank you for this nice presentation, very insightful. Then to the questions, I was wondering if you could elaborate on why you just made an emphasis on the use of the word mission in the case of the missionaries in missionary work within the Dutch Caribbean? And a second quick question is whether there's a contradiction in what you've just made clear concerning mission or submission, or mission simply as submission, and on the other hand, speaking of the way the enslaved managed to conquer the religion of their colonizers. Would you please elaborate on that?
Yes. There's two questions. I will be very brief. The first, it is in the discussion within the Caribbean studies, especially represented by Professor Gert Oostinje in Leiden. He published a book with essays called 50 Years Later, and where the central question is why? Why did the Dutch wait till 1863 for the abolition of slavery? And my interest was then to answer that question, referring to the work of the mission, of the missionaries. That was my interest to show it as one of the factors to answer that question of Professor Gert Oostinje, why 50 years later. And then the second question, if there is a contradiction, in a certain sense, I can refer, and Rishnal Ansano can know more about it, the hero in Curaçao, Tula. When the dialogue between Tula and the missionary Shink, that is in the late 18th century, there was a rebellion in 1795. And Tula was the leader of the slave rebellion. And the authorities sent as a mediator a missionary, Father Shink, a Franciscan missionary. And Tula responded to the missionary saying, "You have preached to us that we are all descendants of Adam and Eve. So that means we are all brothers and sisters. So that means we are all equal. And that's why I will not surrender. We will continue the rebellion because we all are equal." So here you see a slave leader interpreting the Christian message in a different way than the missionary. Father Shink was so disappointed in this interpretation that he lost, the archives say, he lost his inner peace, because he couldn't understand that the slaves didn't accept Christianity as a form of being obedient to the authorities. And he left Curaçao and went to Suriname, where he longed to find back his inner peace. So there you see really, and I can give many more examples of the contradiction between how the slaves interpreted the the gospel, and how the missionaries preached the gospel.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this clarification. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ramon first, and then Mildred, and then Binel.
Good morning in the Caribbean, and good afternoon in Europe. My name is Ramon Totandare. I am a linguist, and I would like to make two comments. First of all, I found it very strange that in the presentation of Mr. Jabini, I didn't hear anything about the Moravians in Suriname and their missionary tasks there. But perhaps it was because Mr. Lampe was going to do that. And what I would like to ask to Mr. Lampe is, you said about the Moravians that they have such a good archive in Herrenhut. What about the archive of the Catholic Church? who were the missionaries here in our islands. I'm from Aruba, sorry, just like Mr. Lampe. In the Leeward Islands, Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao. Are there any proof of slave writing in Patriamiento in the archives of the Catholic Church? That was my question.
Yeah, I have to say that the archives of here of the islands of the Diocese of Willemstad, first it was destroyed by the rebellion of the trade unions in the 30th of May 1969. I don't know if you remember, 30 May 1969, no, the whole archive was destroyed by the flames of it. So I think we have lost a lot. And after that, I have to say that the Catholic priests, they are not trained to keep archives. I have seen disasters, the change of priests, and they throw away wonderful material. And that's quite different than that's why I refer to the Moravian spirituality. The Moravian spirituality had that distinction, that they are very well aware that they are playing a central role in the history of salvation, and they have to document that, and they have to keep it. And because the Germans, they are so good organizers, it is so well organized, and secondly, from the beginning, to read the Word of God in a certain sense, like the Muslims, for the Quran is so important. The enslaved have to read the Word of God, so you will find slave letters already from the 18th century under the Moravian mission, and what we do not have in the Catholic Church and spirituality.
Thank you very much.
And there was also a question to Frank Jabini. If you agree, Armando, I would like to give him the opportunity to also answer. Frank, if you want to.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Armando, for the opportunity, and thank you for your presentation. Very interesting. With regards to the question on the Moravians, yes, I did refer to the Moravians briefly. But in Suriname, the Moravians were not seen as the recognized church. They were more seen as the group of a sect, as I mentioned, that caused the church in Amsterdam to send the letter to the other churches, Reformed churches, to be careful with the Moravian and keep them out of the community. But the Moravians did wonderful work. You know, I would suggest to my colleague Armando that in the case of Suriname, the Moravians did not give the enslaved people the so-called slave Bible, but they work on complete translations of scripture. As early as 1783, there was a complete translation of the New Testament in Sranatongo, and it was printed in 1828. And then, you know, the books of the Old Testament were available in manuscripts. Thank you.
Yeah, correctly, Mr. Franklin.
Thank you so much.
As I said, it is for the Moravians, it was important that they read the complete Bible. So the complete Bible was translated, and it is also important to state that one of the motives for me to look in the Moravian missionary work in Suriname was that because of the work of Mary Turner, saying that non-established churches, you can call it a sect, but let us say the non-established, like the Native Baptist Church was a non-established church in Jamaica, that they, due to the own interpretation of the slaves, played such an important role in the slave rebellion. And I looked in the non-established church, the Moravian in Suriname, it was a complete different social role, because there you will see that because of their missionary work, there were no slave rebellions anymore in the 19th century in Suriname. So here we can compare two non-established churches with a complete different social role. So complex is the history. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Mildred Caprino. And you have to unmute yourself first.
Here I am. Mr. Armando, thank you very much for your explanation. I have just some small remarks. The first one is that I thank you for the new interpretation, the interpretation of what they call slave history. I think it is a process. I deal with that question also, but it is a long way to go because all the scholars are interpreted like the way they read it in the books and the professor teach them. But their own thinking, rethinking what you presented, I'm very happy with that. We call it in Dutch gevorderde inzichten. And I think we have to work on that. So thank you very much. I'm very interested in your book. So I will send you my address. And once again, thank you very much to show us that there are other ways to look at, to interpret the history of enslaved and not the way we always read in the books. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes. I would like to encourage more the younger scholars to continue in this way, and I know that a lot has been published about missionaries, but now I think we should publish more about the religion of the enslaved, the Christianity of the enslaved ones. And like it was said already, from the early beginning of the gospel already, there didn't exist only one Christianity. There existed several and maybe many Christianities.
That is true. That is true. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you very much. I have another question by Winelle Kitten Roberts.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you, Armando Lampe, for the insightful presentation. It is good to see you, although not in person, for I have read and used your text both as a student and as a teacher of church history. So a couple of things very quickly. In terms of the question of the slave Bible that Franklin has referenced, and is correct in saying that that particular Bible was not used among the Protestant missionaries in the Caribbean in general. However, even though the complete Bible was available, the fact is that when we look at the scriptures and the sermons that were used, they were very, very specific in the text that they were going to. So I don't think that it's an argument to say that because the slave Bible was not used, that it means that the full gospel, and I said, I'm not sure if I understand the concept of the full gospel that Franklin referenced. So that would be my first point. The second point, in terms of the 50 years after and the involvement of Christian missionaries in that process of being used to educate and to orient the enslaved peoples in a particular directions before they're free, is quite different in other places. So when we come to the British Caribbean, for example, and we look at Antigua, where there was a strong presence of Moravians, the Antigua was the island that was allowed the freedom of enslaved Africans first, based on the argument that the Moravians had done such a good job in teaching them that they were ready for freedom. So it's sort of different in the sense that the other islands had to wait for a period of time, and I mean up to several years, many remained enslaved. And within the context of Antigua, the liberation was widespread, and they were able to purchase property and things like that. The other point I want to look at, the third one very quickly, is that with respect to the archives, and I strongly agree. I don't consider myself to be a young scholar. I don't know who you probably refer to. I've been researching for over 30 years in terms of all the archives throughout the Caribbean, the Moravian archives in Bethlehem, and now I'm living in Europe. For the last few years, I have the opportunity now to spend a significant amount of time at Herrnhut. And I do agree that there's a wealth of information. There was a mixture of emotions I had when I went there for the first time. I sat down, I saw the wealth of information. I was really pleased to see it, extremely elated to see all the documents, but quite upset by the fact that it was not accessible. And this goes back to the narrative of decolonizing the archives. And it is one thing to have the records there and all the letters and things like that, but if persons are not aware of it, they don't have access, then it makes no sense. They just stay there. When I go and I do certain pieces of research, the material has not been touched at all. No one has any interest in it. I did a recent piece of research for a lecture I gave last summer, and a public lecture. And in so doing, I was able to find my relatives, some of my relatives who had migrated from Barbados to Trinidad. And it's right there in the archives. And there I'm now saying to my family, no, I finally found my great-grandfather. Where am I finding him? In the archives in Herrnhut. So I am just saying that this process now of decolonizing accessibility, which of course in some archives, the process of digitization is very helpful, and getting funding to have these materials accessible. Now, I guide some master students myself, and in guiding them, I want to say, I want you to do more research based on your perspective, because it's now the perspective of those who have experienced the process of enslavement. We have quite a bit on the missionaries. I agree with you, a wealth of information. And now, how do we feel? What is our experience of descendants of enslaved Africans? And so we can connect the narrative that has been passed on, but substantiate this narrative with the records that are found. So I thank you so much. I will be happy to also get a copy of your book again. So I'll send my information. I don't have it here with me, so I don't have it at all. So I'll be appreciate receiving it.
Okay.
Thank you all very much. Very interesting.
Yeah, thank you so much. What you have stated is I fully agree with it. In the first place, when we talk about the Caribbean, we cannot generalize about the Caribbean. You have mentioned the situation of Antigua is so different than in Suriname. Even the Dutch Caribbean, we cannot generalize. For example, St. Martin, already in 1848, when the abolition of slavery took place in the French part of that small island, the slaves, they crossed there was no border, there's a small island. The authorities, they were forced to de facto accept abolition of slavery in a Dutch territory already in 1848. So indeed, we have to look at the specifics of each island. It can be so different. And I fully agree with what you said about the decolonization of the archives, and about what you have said about the archives of Herrnhut. Yes, I have written down those also in the chat who asked me a copy of the book. I hope to receive the addresses where I can send you a copy of the book. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you, for this forceful statements. And of course, we are happy to distribute the addresses. So thank you so much, Armando, for this generous present you are giving everyone who wants a book. You can send the addresses just to the email that you received with this link to this webinar, and we will be happy to to send them to you then. So we are really coming to the end of this webinar, but there is still a little bit of time. So if anyone has not yet had the opportunity, or I haven't seen a hand, I cannot see all of you in one screen. So
there were some questions in the, for example,
chat.
one in the chat group from Erika Meyers, but she left already.
Yeah, but please answer it, because we record this meeting, and Erika Myers is also part of our team, so she will hear your answer, and I think others will also be very interested. Could you maybe say more about what you find on the interpretation of Christianity and the Bible by enslaved people, and how it contradicts the theology of the missionaries? So I think this is really a nice question.
I think it's a very interesting question, and my colleague Franklin, and I'm grateful for his presentation. He referred to one aspect to explain why there was a massive conversion to the Moravian church under the slaves in the 19th century after 1828. And because of the change of the law, yes, you can use a legal, a legal factor, no? But I am much more interested also in the African religiosity. You have massive changes within their own worldview, and I am much interested in that question, that massive conversion to Moravianism in the 19th century after 1828. Was it only due to a legal aspect? Was it only due to the fact that in order to become free, you have to present a proof that you belong to an organized Christian church? Was that the only reason? Or within the African religiosity, we see examples that the whole community will destroy objects of witchcraft, for example, and they move on within their own religiosity to a new stage in their own spiritual battle, to use the word of my colleague Franklin. So I think that is one of the questions I would like to state. I said it one. I gave a conference, and I would like to read what I am saying about this. I said the following. You cannot interpret this massive conversion only as a mere manipulation. It is probably that the Afro-Surinamese, they saw in Christianity at a certain moment in the 19th century collectively as a religious force that could protect them against witchcraft and evil. That is a and I follow with my conference saying, when the missionaries started to destroy the sacred objects of witchcraft in the 19th century, also Moravian missionaries, the slaves interpreted Christianity as a ritual of cleansing of witchcraft, what was usual in the African worldview. The missionaries interpreted the conversion like an abandonment, that the slaves abandoned their idolatry. But the slaves, they interpreted the Christianity from their African view and they saw it as a protection against witchcraft and the powers of evil. Christianity as an amulet against evil. And that's why in the archives, you will find in the 19th century constantly that the missionaries, also the Moravian missionaries, after the conversion, even after the conversion of Johannes King, they continue complaining that Johannes King is not fully converted, that he still is imprisoned in his African religious view. There are so many letters of Moravian missionaries complaining that the Christians, the slaves who became Christians, who converted to the gospel, they continue practicing they continue believing in witchcraft. And my explanation is this: the missionary, they didn't understand that there was the conversion was not so clear and distinct, but that there was a lot of continuity with their former African worldview.
Thank you very much, Armando, for this really interesting thought, and we will keep on working with that in our group, I'm sure. So thank you, both of the speakers, so much for your contribution today. Really thought-provoking, really great. And I also like to thank the colleagues and the whole audience for attending, for sharing your insights, your questions. This was really a very high quality discussion, I think. So I very much enjoyed doing this. It really tests for more, I think. If we decide to organize another webinar in the future, you will certainly find it on our website. So kerk en slavernij.nl, there we will always put, if we do something like this. You can also find the publications of our group. So thank you all for your presence, the speakers, and hope to see you all, not too long from now. Thank you.
Annette, Franklin would like to have a last word. Franklin raised his hand for a final word, I think.
Franklin, do you want to?
If it's okay, some that Armando shared, I wanted to share something, but I see the time is there and I don't mind.
No, please take your time. Please take your time, Franklin. I didn't see your hand, so my apologies. Okay. And please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. What Armando shared about the Africans accepting Christianity, we have two cases specific here in Suriname. 1861 in the village called Guyaba, people took all their attributes of their traditional religion, brought it to the Moravians, and they throw them in the river, all of it. And we're willing to accept Christianity, and they were baptized. And after that, they continue to live in their traditional religion as usual. Another one is 1890 in the other part of Suriname, among the Njuka people, the Okanisi, we call them also, where something similar happened. The Moravians didn't have a mission there, so they thought this was an opportunity for them to start a missionary work there. When they spoke with the chief, he told them, you know what we did, we throw away the less powerful gods so that we can continue with the more powerful ones. So there was a difference in understanding on both sides. But there is also another aspect to this. And then I'll come to the question that came up about the full gospel. I think that in the missionary preaching, they were not able to present the gospel of Christ in such a way that people will understand it holistically. Because people from the African descent, they do not have the segregation between that what is spiritual and that what is secular. So if they accept the message, it has to have an impact in every aspect of their lives. If I try to grow my crop and something happened, I will not say it's because of the weather, it is something spiritual. You know, if I can't get children, I'm barren, I won't say it's something medical, it is spiritual. So in the preaching of the missionaries, they did not present the gospel in that way. It was more to save their souls, their spirit, and that's it. So Christ was not present in the daily life, you know, in the struggles of this daily life, where people who were faithful to the gospel as preached by the Moravians on the one hand, were trying to find help in other aspects of life because they did not receive that aspect of the gospel, if it's clear what I meant. So they didn't know that you can also pray when you have your crop, you can do other aspects, calling upon the name of Jesus in whatever you do. So yes, there is this aspect of people adding the gospel to what they already have, but there is also of a lack of presentation of the gospel in its fullness, I would say, among the people. But I thought that's what I said earlier. I thought that was something for another discussion,
Yes,
as I wanted to focus on the slavery issue and the way the gospel was shared with the African people. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. And there will be another discussion, I'm sure. So thank you all. Bye-bye.